The red velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace had witnessed countless secrets, but none quite like this. As dawn broke over London on that fateful Tuesday morning, a single television episode would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy and ignite a media firestorm that would rage for months. The Crown, Netflix's award-winning drama series, had crossed a line that even its boldest critics never imagined possible. What started as artistic interpretation had become something far more dangerous, a perceived attack on the dignity of King Charles III himself. The scene in question lasted barely 3 minutes, but its impact would reverberate through the halls of power, newspaper headlines, and living rooms across the globe. Palace insiders called it utter nonsense, while others whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more truth to the portrayal than anyone dared admit. This is the story of how fiction collided with reality, how a streaming giant found itself battling the British establishment, and how one controversial scene nearly brought down the most successful royal drama ever created. It's a tale of artistic freedom versus royal protocol, of truth versus perception, and of the dangerous game played when entertainment dares to portray real people in ways they never intended to be seen. The controversy would expose deep fractures within the royal family, reveal the power struggles behind palace walls, and ultimately force the world to question, where does dramatic license end and defamation begin? The morning sun cast long shadows across the ornate gardens of Clarence House as King Charles III sat in his private study, a cup of Earl Grey growing cold on the mahogany desk before him. The mahogany had been a gift from his grandmother, the Queen Mother, and its polished surface now reflected the troubled expression that had settled across his weathered features. At 75, Charles had weathered many storms during his long journey to the throne, but nothing quite prepared him for what his private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, was about to show him on the tablet computer. The Netflix series The Crown had been a source of mild irritation for the royal family for years. They had watched with varying degrees of discomfort as their most private moments were dramatized for global entertainment. Previous seasons had depicted his parents' marriage troubles, his sister's rebellious youth, and even his own complicated relationship with Diana. The palace had maintained a policy of dignified silence, occasionally issuing carefully worded statements about the show's fictional nature when pressed by persistent journalists. But this was different. This crossed every line imaginable. Sir Clive cleared his throat nervously before speaking. He had served 3 monarchs in his distinguished career, but had never faced a situation quite like this. Your Majesty, I'm afraid we have a significant problem with the latest episode that aired last night. His voice carried the weight of decades of diplomatic experience, yet even he struggled to maintain his usual composure. Charles looked up from the morning briefing papers spread before him. The red boxes containing state documents seemed suddenly insignificant compared to whatever crisis was unfolding. "What exactly are we dealing with, Clive?" he asked, though something in his secretary's expression suggested he might not want to know the answer. The tablet screen flickered to life, displaying the Netflix interface. The offending episode was titled The Weight of the Crown, and its description promised viewers an intimate look at the personal struggles behind palace walls. What it actually delivered was something far more controversial. The scene in question portrayed a private conversation between Charles and his eldest son, William, set in the weeks following Queen Elizabeth II's death. In the dramatized version, Charles was shown breaking down emotionally, confessing doubts about his ability to rule, and expressing bitter resentment toward both his late mother and the institution of monarchy itself. The fictional Charles ranted about feeling trapped, spoke disparagingly of royal traditions, and, most damaging of all, questioned whether the monarchy should even continue to exist. The scene painted him as weak, unstable, and fundamentally unfit for the throne he had waited 73 years to inherit. Charles watched in horrified silence as his television doppelganger delivered lines that bore no resemblance to any conversation he had ever had. The actor, while physically similar, portrayed a version of the king that was petulant, self-pitying, and deeply disrespectful toward the crown he had just inherited. Worse still, the scene implied that William had secretly recorded their conversation, adding layers of family betrayal to an already explosive narrative. "This is completely fabricated," Charles said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building within him. "Not a single word of this conversation ever took place. The entire premise is not just wrong, it's malicious." Sir Clive nodded grimly. "The response has been immediate and severe, Your Majesty. Social media is in uproar. The newspapers are preparing their morning editions around this story. Prime Minister Sunak's office has already called 3 times this morning requesting guidance on how to respond." The implications were staggering. Charles had spent decades rebuilding his public image after the scandals of his youth and the tragedy of Diana's death. His coronation had been a triumph, marking the beginning of what many hoped would be a new golden age for the British monarchy. In less than an hour of television drama, all of that progress seemed to be unraveling. The phone began ringing incessantly. First came the call from Prince William, whose own portrayal in the scene had left him equally furious. The real William had never recorded any conversations with his father, had never witnessed the breakdown depicted on screen, and certainly had never been party to the anti-monarchist sentiments attributed to Charles in the show. "Father, we need to respond immediately," William's voice crackled through the secure line. "This isn't just artistic license. This is character assassination." Next came Princess, and, typically direct in her assessment, "This is war, Charles. They've declared war on us, and we need to fight back with everything we have." The palace communications team was in crisis mode. Press Secretary Victoria Hartwell had fielded over 200 media inquiries in the past 2 hours, each more urgent than the last. International news outlets were picking up the story, with CNN, BBC World Service, and Sky News all preparing special reports on the controversy. The financial implications were immediate and severe. The pound sterling dropped against the dollar as currency traders worried about potential constitutional instability. Tourism boards reported a flood of canceled bookings to royal attractions. Republican movements in Commonwealth countries seized upon the portrayal as evidence that the monarchy was outdated and dysfunctional. Charles found himself facing an impossible choice. Responding to the allegations would give them credibility and keep the story alive in the news cycle. Remaining silent would allow the fictional portrayal to become accepted as truth in the public consciousness. Either path seemed to lead to disaster. The morning briefing from MI5 added another layer of concern. Intelligence officials reported increased chatter from anti-monarchist groups who were using the Netflix scene as recruitment material. Republican politicians in Scotland and Wales were calling for emergency debates about the future of the Union. Even in traditionally loyal regions, polls showed a measurable drop in support for the crown. "The damage is spreading faster than we anticipated," reported Sir Clive after consulting with the various department heads. "Our contacts at Netflix claim they try to reach out for comment before airing, but our records show no such attempt was made. They're either lying or incompetent, and neither option helps our situation." The legal team presented their preliminary assessment. While the scene was clearly defamatory, pursuing legal action against Netflix would be extraordinarily difficult. The show carried disclaimers about its fictional nature, and American courts had historically been reluctant to rule against entertainment companies in favor of foreign royalty. A lawsuit could drag on for years while generating even more negative publicity. Meanwhile, the writers and producers of The Crown were maintaining their position that the series had always been a dramatization, not a documentary. In carefully worded statements to the press, they emphasized their right to artistic interpretation while refusing to specifically defend or explain the controversial scene. The public reaction was polarized and intense. Royal supporters organized online campaigns calling for boycotts of Netflix, while Republicans praised the show for finally showing what they claimed was the real Charles behind the public facade. Social media platforms struggled to contain the flood of commentary, memes, and conspiracy theories spawning from the controversy. By midday, the situation had escalated beyond a simple public relations problem. constitutional scholars were being interviewed on television about the implications of a monarch whose fitness for rule was being questioned so publicly. Opposition politicians were calling for parliamentary inquiries. Even traditionally supportive newspapers were running editorials, questioning whether the palace's response had been adequate. Charles realized that this was no longer just about one television scene. The controversy had exposed deeper questions about the monarchy's role in modern Britain, the balance between public interest and private dignity, and the power of media to shape public perception of institutional authority. The crown that had felt so natural on his head just months ago now seemed to weigh more heavily than ever before. The afternoon brought a parade of advisors, each offering different strategies for managing the crisis. Some advocated for aggressive legal action. Others suggested a coordinated media blitz to counter the narrative, and still others recommended waiting for the story to fade from public attention. None of the options seemed adequate to address the fundamental damage that had already been done. As evening approached, Charles found himself alone in his study once again, staring out at the darkening London skyline. The city that had cheered his coronation just months earlier now seemed hostile and uncertain. He understood that the coming days would test not just his personal resilience, but the very foundations of the institution he had inherited. The real battle for the crown was only just beginning. The emergency meeting convened at 9 o'clock the following morning in the palace's most secure conference room. The participants represented the inner circle of royal power: the king's private secretary, the palace communications director, the head of royal protection, representatives from Downing Street, and senior members of the royal family, including Prince William and Princess. And the mahogany table around which they gathered had witnessed countless crisis meetings throughout history, but few had carried such immediate and far-reaching implications for the monarchy's survival. Sir Clive opened the meeting with a comprehensive briefing on the overnight developments. The controversial Netflix episode had been viewed by an estimated 47 million households worldwide in its first 24 hours, making it the most watched episode in the series' history. Social media engagement had reached unprecedented levels, with the hashtag CrownGate trending globally across multiple platforms. More concerning still, preliminary polling data suggested that public confidence in King Charles had dropped by 18 percentage points overnight. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," Sir Clive reported, his voice carrying the weight of his decades of experience in crisis management. "We're dealing with what our intelligence services are calling an information warfare scenario. Foreign state actors, particularly those with Republican agendas, are amplifying the controversy through coordinated social media campaigns." Princess Anne leaned forward in her chair, her expression grim but determined. Throughout her life, she had witnessed the royal family weather numerous storms, from the abdication crisis that predated her birth to the scandals of the 1990s that nearly brought down the monarchy. Yet this felt different. This was a direct assault on the very legitimacy of royal authority, broadcast into millions of homes and presented as entertainment rather than propaganda. "We're not just fighting Netflix," she observed sharply. "We're fighting a narrative that portrays Charles as fundamentally unfit for the throne. This goes beyond defamation. This is an attempt to delegitimize the monarchy itself." Prince William nodded in agreement, though his focus remained on the personal dimension of the attack. The portrayal of his relationship with his father had been particularly painful to witness. In the fictional scene, he was depicted as manipulative and disloyal, secretly recording private conversations and exploiting his father's emotional vulnerability. The real William had never been anything but supportive of his father's transition to kingship, making the dramatic interpretation feel like a betrayal of their actual relationship. The writers clearly had access to some form of inside information, William pointed out, his voice carefully controlled despite his obvious anger. They knew about private family dynamics, specific locations where conversations took place, even personal mannerisms. This wasn't just creative imagination. Someone provided them with details. The implication hung heavily in the air. If someone within the palace's inner circle had been feeding information to the show's writers, the security implications were staggering. The head of Royal Protection, Commander Sarah Matthews, had been conducting discreet inquiries since the previous evening, but her preliminary findings were troubling. Several former palace employees had been hired as consultants by the show's production team over the years, and determining which specific details might have been leaked would require a comprehensive investigation. The communications team presented their analysis of media coverage from around the world. British newspapers were split along predictable political lines, with conservative outlets defending the king, while liberal publications questioned his fitness for office. American media had embraced the story as confirmation of their long-held suspicions about royal dysfunction. European coverage was more measured, but deeply skeptical about the monarchy's future stability. The Commonwealth response is particularly concerning, reported Victoria Hartwell, the press secretary. Australian Republican movements are using this as evidence for their upcoming referendum campaign. Canadian politicians are calling for debates about the Governor-General's role. We're seeing constitutional questions raised in countries where the monarchy has been stable for decades. The legal team delivered their updated assessment of potential remedies. While defamation laws in the United Kingdom might provide some recourse, Netflix's primary operations were based in the United States, where First Amendment protections made successful litigation extremely unlikely. Even if legal action succeeded, the process could take years while generating continuous negative publicity. Worse still, any legal proceedings would require the royal family to engage in public testimony about their private conversations and relationships, potentially causing more damage than the original controversy. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's representative outlined the government's position. While Number 10 officially supported the monarchy, they were deeply concerned about the political implications of the controversy. Opposition parties were already preparing parliamentary questions about the cost of royal protection for a monarch whose legitimacy was being questioned so publicly. The government needed the crisis resolved quickly to avoid it becoming a major political liability. The PM wants to be supportive, the representative explained carefully, but he needs to see a clear path forward. The public expects leadership from the palace on this issue. Silence is being interpreted as weakness or, worse, as confirmation that the portrayal contains elements of truth. The international implications were perhaps most troubling of all. British diplomatic missions around the world reported increased questions about the monarchy's stability from their counterparts in foreign governments. Trade negotiations have been temporarily suspended in some countries, while officials waited to see how the crisis developed. The soft power that the royal family represented for British foreign policy was being actively undermined by the ongoing controversy. Intelligence reports revealed the extent to which foreign actors were exploiting the situation. Russian and Chinese social media operations had immediately begun amplifying the most damaging aspects of the story, presenting it as evidence of Western democratic decay. Iranian state media had picked up the narrative as proof of British imperial hypocrisy. Even allies like France and Germany were showing increased skepticism about the special relationship with Britain while the constitutional crisis remained unresolved. The financial implications continued to mount throughout the day. The FTSE 100 had opened down significantly, with tourism and luxury goods companies particularly affected by concerns about damage to the brand Britain that the royal family represented. Currency traders were treating the controversy as a potential indicator of broader political instability, causing the pound to weaken against major international currencies. Charles listened to each presentation with growing concern, but also with the steely determination that had carried him through decades of preparation for this role. He understood that the crisis represented more than just personal embarrassment or family discord. The very legitimacy of constitutional monarchy in the 21st century was being tested by a 3-minute television scene that bore no resemblance to reality. "We need to understand that this is not ultimately about the crown," he said finally, his voice carrying the authority of his office despite the personal pain evident in his expression. "This is about whether democratic societies will allow entertainment corporations to undermine elected institutions through deliberate misinformation disguised as drama." The discussion turned to potential response strategies. Traditional palace protocol suggested that dignified silence was usually the most effective approach to media controversies, allowing negative stories to fade from public attention while maintaining royal dignity above the fray. However, the unprecedented reach and impact of streaming platforms had fundamentally changed the media landscape since those protocols were established. A comprehensive media response would require coordination across multiple platforms and time zones, reaching audiences who might never read traditional British newspapers or watch conventional television news. The palace communications team would need to leverage social media, international broadcasting, and digital platforms in ways they had never attempted before. The meeting concluded with a decision to develop multiple response options for the king's consideration. These would range from a strongly worded formal statement challenging the accuracy of the portrayal to a comprehensive media strategy involving interviews, documentaries, and legal action. Each option carried significant risks, but the cost of inaction appeared to be growing by the hour. As the participants filed out of the conference room, Charles remained behind with Sir Clive to discuss the most sensitive aspect of the crisis. If someone within the palace had indeed provided information to the show's writers, identifying and addressing that breach of trust would be essential to preventing future attacks. The investigation would need to be discreet but thorough, examining years of personnel records and communications without alerting potential suspects to the inquiry. "This will get worse before it gets better," Sir Clive observed quietly. "But we've faced existential threats before and survived. The institution is stronger than any single controversy." Charles nodded, though he remained deeply troubled by the speed with which public opinion had shifted. The crown that had felt so secure just days earlier now seemed to rest on increasingly unstable foundations, threatened not by foreign enemies or political opponents, but by the power of fictional narratives to reshape public perception of truth itself. The investigation began at dawn on the third day of the crisis, conducted with the precision and discretion that had characterized royal security operations for generations. Commander Sarah Matthews assembled a small team of the most trusted personnel, each sworn to absolute secrecy about their mission. The task before them was delicate and potentially explosive, identifying how intimate details of royal family dynamics had found their way into the Netflix writer's room. The scope of the inquiry was staggering. Over the past 5 years, hundreds of individuals had enjoyed varying levels of access to the royal household. Current and former staff members, visiting dignitaries, contractors, journalists, and even family friends all represented potential sources of leaked information. Each person would need to be investigated without alerting them to the inquiry or compromising ongoing palace operations. Detective Chief Inspector Michael Henderson, on secondment from Scotland Yard's Specialist Protection Unit, led the technical aspects of the investigation. His team began by analyzing the specific details portrayed in the controversial scene, creating a detailed timeline of when and where such conversations might have taken place. They cross-referenced this information with palace security logs, staff schedules, and visitor records to identify who could have been present during the relevant time frames. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Emily Richardson, a forensic psychologist who specialized in behavioral analysis, was brought in to examine the scripting and characterization of the fictional Charles. Her analysis revealed sophisticated knowledge of the king's speech patterns, emotional triggers, and psychological vulnerabilities that went far beyond what could be gleaned from public appearances or official statements. Whoever provided this information had intimate knowledge of His Majesty's private behavior, Dr. Richardson reported to Commander Matthews. The writing demonstrates understanding of personal mannerisms, family dynamics, and emotional responses that would only be apparent to someone who had spent considerable time in close proximity to the royal family. The investigation team created a comprehensive database of every person who had enjoyed such access over the relevant period. The list was longer than anyone had anticipated, including not just palace staff, but also personal friends, medical professionals, spiritual advisors, and even tradespeople who had worked on private royal residences. Each name would require careful vetting without compromising the confidentiality that was essential to royal household operations. Meanwhile, the media storm continued to intensify around the world. The controversial episode had been translated into dozens of languages and was being discussed on television programs from Tokyo to Sao Paulo. Cultural commentators debated the ethics of dramatizing living public figures, while constitutional scholars argued about the implications for democratic institutions more broadly. In the United States, the story dominated cable news coverage as pundits debated whether Netflix had crossed ethical boundaries or simply exercised legitimate artistic freedom. Late-night comedy shows seized upon the controversy, creating sketch comedy versions that further distorted public perception of the real events. The viral nature of digital media meant that millions of people were forming opinions about King Charles based on increasingly exaggerated and fictional portrayals. The palace communications team found themselves fighting a multi-front battle against misinformation that was spreading faster than they could respond. Traditional media outlets were generally responsible in their reporting, distinguishing between the fictional portrayal and documented reality. However, social media platforms struggled to contain the flood of conspiracy theories, manipulated images, and false claims that emerged from the original controversy. Victoria Hartwell established a dedicated monitoring center to track online conversations about the royal family in real time. The data was sobering. Negative sentiment had increased by over 300% since the episode aired, with particularly sharp declines in support among younger demographics who were more likely to consume streaming content than traditional news media. "We're not just dealing with a public relations problem," Victoria reported during the daily crisis briefing. "We're witnessing a fundamental shift in how public opinion is formed and manipulated. The tools that once allowed us to manage royal narratives are no longer adequate for the digital age." The psychological impact on the royal family themselves was becoming increasingly apparent. King Charles found himself questioning interactions with staff members who had served faithfully for years, wondering if casual conversations or private moments had been secretly recorded or later recounted to outside parties. The atmosphere within the palace became noticeably more guarded as everyone struggled to maintain normal operations while under suspicion. Prince William threw himself into his official duties with renewed determination, appearing at public engagements and conducting interviews where he could indirectly counter the negative narrative without explicitly acknowledging the controversy. His appearances were carefully managed to demonstrate the strength and stability of the royal family, while avoiding direct references to the Netflix drama that might give it additional publicity. Princess Anne took a more combative approach, using her scheduled speeches to deliver carefully crafted messages about the importance of truth in public discourse and the dangers of allowing entertainment to substitute for factual reporting. Her comments were indirect, but unmistakably critical of the streaming giant's editorial choices. The Commonwealth response remained deeply concerning for palace strategists. In Australia, where a referendum on Republican government was scheduled for the following year, the controversy had become a major campaign issue. Republican advocates argued that the Netflix portrayal, whether accurate or not, demonstrated the inherent problems with hereditary leadership in democratic societies. Canadian political leaders were more circumspect in their public comments, but private diplomatic communications revealed significant concern about the monarchy's stability. The Governor General's office reported increased questions from federal and provincial politicians about constitutional procedures that might be needed if the British Crown became untenable as a Canadian institution. In smaller Commonwealth nations, the implications were potentially even more dramatic. Countries like Jamaica, Barbados, and several Caribbean islands have been considering transitions to Republican government for years. The Netflix controversy provided additional ammunition for politicians who argued that the monarchy was an outdated vestige of colonial rule that no longer served their national interests. The investigation team made their first significant discovery on the fourth day of the crisis. Financial records revealed that Marcus Thompson, a former palace gardener who had been dismissed for minor infractions 2 years earlier, had received a significant payment from a production company associated with the Crown just weeks before filming began on the controversial episode. Thompson had worked at various royal residences for over 15 years, with access to private gardens and outdoor areas where informal conversations might have taken place. His dismissal had been acrimonious, involving allegations of unauthorized photography and violations of confidentiality agreements. The payment he received was substantial enough to suggest compensation for valuable information rather than routine consulting services. Commander Matthews authorized discreet surveillance of Thompson, while legal experts examined the terms of his original employment agreements and confidentiality obligations. If he had indeed provided information to the show's producers, pursuing criminal charges for breach of contract and violation of official secrets might be possible under British law. However, any legal action would need to be carefully considered for its potential to generate additional publicity for the controversy. The discovery also raised troubling questions about security protocols and background checking procedures for palace staff. If Thompson had been able to overhear and later recount private conversations, how many other former employees might pose similar risks? The implications for future royal family privacy and security were staggering. International intelligence partners began providing assistance with the investigation as the security implications became clearer. The American FBI shared information about Netflix's corporate structure and production processes, while Canadian intelligence services provided analysis of how the controversy was being exploited by foreign state actors seeking to undermine Commonwealth unity. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that went far beyond simple gossip or disgruntled employee complaints. Foreign intelligence services had apparently identified the cultural power of the Crown as a vehicle for influencing Western public opinion about democratic institutions. By feeding carefully selected information to the show's writers, they could shape global perceptions of the British monarchy without leaving fingerprints on obvious propaganda efforts. As the first week of the crisis drew to a close, King Charles found himself facing decisions that would define not just his own reign, but the future of constitutional monarchy itself. The investigation had revealed the scope of the threat facing the institution, but it had also exposed vulnerabilities in royal security and communications that would need to be addressed regardless of how the current controversy was resolved. The weight of the Crown had never felt heavier, but Charles understood that the coming days would determine whether the thousand-year-old institution he had inherited would survive the 21st century's new forms of information warfare. The battle for truth was only beginning, and the stakes could not be higher. The revelation about Marcus Thompson's involvement sent shockwaves through the palace hierarchy, but it also provided the first concrete evidence needed to mount a coordinated response. Legal advisors worked through the night, preparing documentation for both criminal charges and civil litigation, while the communications team developed strategies to reveal the information warfare campaign without appearing defensive or desperate. Sir Clive convened another emergency meeting, this time including representatives from Britain's intelligence services and the National Cybersecurity Center. The scope of the threat had evolved far beyond a simple entertainment industry controversy into a matter of national security. Foreign state actors had successfully weaponized popular culture to undermine public confidence in British democratic institutions. The Thompson connection is just the beginning, reported Detective Chief Inspector Henderson. Our analysis suggests a coordinated effort involving multiple sources and several years of preparation. This wasn't opportunistic gossip from a disgruntled employee. This was strategic intelligence gathering designed to compromise the monarchy's legitimacy at a moment of maximum vulnerability. The intelligence briefing painted a disturbing picture of modern information warfare. Traditional spycraft had evolved to include cultural infiltration, using entertainment media to shape public opinion more effectively than crude propaganda ever could. The Crown had become an unwitting vehicle for this campaign, its global reach and prestigious reputation providing perfect cover for spreading carefully crafted disinformation about the royal family. Prince William reviewed the evidence with the focused intensity that had characterized his military service. The attack on his father represented a threat to the entire constitutional system, but it also revealed something more personal and painful. The fictional portrayal of their relationship had been designed to exploit the genuine love and respect between father and son, turning their emotional bond into apparent evidence of weakness and manipulation. They knew exactly which buttons to push, William observed grimly. The conversation they depicted never happened, but it was psychologically sophisticated enough to seem plausible. Someone spent considerable time studying our family dynamics to create maximum damage with minimum obvious falsification. Princess and brought her characteristic directness to the strategic planning session. Throughout her decades of royal service, she had watched the family weather numerous scandals and controversies, but this felt different in both scale and sophistication. The traditional palace approach of dignified silence and gradual reputation rebuilding would not be adequate to address a coordinated information warfare campaign. We're not dealing with tabloid gossip or paparazzi invasion anymore, she pointed out sharply. This is asymmetric warfare using cultural weapons. Our response needs to be proportionally sophisticated and aggressive. Playing defense will not save the institution. The legal team presented multiple options for addressing the Thompson case and the broader Netflix conspiracy. Criminal charges could be filed under the Official Secrets Act, breach of confidence laws, and new cybercrime legislation. Civil litigation could seek damages and injunctive relief to prevent further distribution of the controversial content. However, each legal avenue carried significant risks and potential for backfire. Any legal action will become a media spectacle, warned the chief legal advisor. Netflix has essentially unlimited resources for litigation, and American courts have historically been protective of entertainment industry speech rights. We could find ourselves in a years-long legal battle that generates continuous negative publicity while achieving minimal practical results. The communication strategy required equally careful consideration. The palace needed to reveal the information warfare campaign and Thompson's betrayal without appearing to engage in conspiracy theorizing or defensive overreaction. The evidence needed to speak for itself while maintaining the dignity and credibility that were essential to royal authority. King Charles made the difficult decision to break decades of precedent by directly addressing the controversy in a televised statement. The palace had traditionally avoided responding to entertainment industry portrayals, considering such responses beneath royal dignity. However, the national security implications and coordinated foreign interference required an unprecedented response. The speech was scheduled for prime time on all major British networks, with simultaneous international distribution through diplomatic channels and digital platforms. Communications teams worked frantically to craft language that would be strong enough to counter the false narrative while measured enough to maintain royal dignity and credibility. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to reveal the full scope of the conspiracy. Thompson had not acted alone. Financial records and communications analysis revealed a network of former palace employees, freelance journalists, and cultural consultants who had been systematically recruited to provide information about royal family activities and relationships. The sophistication of the operation was remarkable. Rather than seeking dramatic state secrets or security information, the conspirators had focused on personal details, emotional vulnerabilities, and family dynamics that could be weaponized through fictional dramatization. The approach was more psychologically sophisticated than traditional espionage, targeting public perception rather than classified intelligence. Dr. Emily Richardson's psychological analysis revealed how carefully the fictional scene had been constructed to maximize damage while maintaining plausible deniability. The writers had combined genuine personality traits and relationship dynamics with completely fabricated conversations and emotional breakdowns. The result was sophisticated character assassination disguised as creative interpretation. The goal wasn't to expose actual misconduct, Dr. Richardson explained to the crisis team. The goal was to implant doubt about His Majesty's emotional stability and fitness for leadership. By combining real psychological insights with fictional dramatic scenarios, they created a narrative that feels true even though it's completely fabricated. International allies began providing support as the foreign interference aspects became clear. The Australian government, despite its own Republican political movements, recognized the broader implications of allowing foreign state actors to manipulate democratic institutions through cultural warfare. Canadian intelligence services shared information about similar campaigns targeting their own governmental institutions. The European Union's disinformation monitoring systems had detected coordinated amplification of the Netflix controversy across multiple member states. Russian and Chinese social media operations had immediately seized upon the story to promote broader narratives about Western democratic decay and the obsolescence of traditional governmental institutions. American intelligence agencies were more cautious in their response, given Netflix's status as a major American corporation and First Amendment considerations. However, private briefings to congressional leadership emphasized the broader implications of allowing entertainment media to be used as vehicles for foreign information warfare against allied democratic institutions. The Commonwealth response remained the most immediately concerning aspect of the crisis. Several Caribbean nations had accelerated their existing Republican transition plans, citing the Netflix controversy as evidence that the monarchy was no longer stable enough to serve as their head of state. Australia's Republican referendum campaign had incorporated the fictional portrayal into their messaging, arguing that hereditary leadership was inherently unsuitable for modern democratic societies. Public opinion polling continued to show troubling trends. While British support for the monarchy remained strong among older demographics, younger Britons were increasingly skeptical about royal institutions. International polling showed even more dramatic shifts, with significant declines in positive sentiment toward the British Crown in multiple Commonwealth countries. The Palace communications team struggled to address the global nature of the crisis with their traditional tools and methods. Royal tours and public appearances could influence British public opinion gradually over time, but they were inadequate to address viral misinformation spreading across international digital platforms within hours or days. Victoria Hartwell recommended a completely new approach to royal communications, involving direct engagement with digital platforms, international influencer networks, and non-traditional media channels. The monarchy's survival in the 21st century would require adaptation to modern information ecosystems rather than relying on historical precedents and protocols. We're fighting a 21st century information war with 18th century tools, she observed during one particularly tense briefing session. The institution's survival requires us to adapt our methods while preserving our essential character and dignity. As King Charles prepared for his historic address to the nation and Commonwealth, he understood that his words would either begin the restoration of royal authority or mark the beginning of its terminal decline. The crown that had survived world wars, constitutional crises, and social revolution now faced its greatest challenge yet: the power of fictional narrative to reshape public perception of reality itself. The battle for truth was about to begin in earnest, and the stakes could not have been higher for the future of constitutional monarchy in the modern world. The historic address began at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, broadcast live from the throne room at Buckingham Palace. King Charles sat beneath portraits of his ancestors, the weight of 1,000 years of monarchical tradition visible in his bearing as he looked directly into the camera. The opening words would echo through history as the moment when the British crown directly confronted the new realities of information warfare in the digital age. "My fellow citizens of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth," he began, his voice carrying both the authority of his office and the personal pain of a man whose character had been systematically assassinated on the global stage. "I speak to you tonight not about matters of state or ceremony, but about something far more fundamental: the difference between truth and fiction, and the responsibility we all share to preserve that distinction." The speech had been crafted over countless hours by the most skilled writers and constitutional experts available to the palace. Every word had been weighed for its legal, diplomatic, and political implications. The goal was unprecedented: to expose a coordinated foreign information warfare campaign while maintaining the dignity essential to royal authority. King Charles methodically dismantled the Netflix portrayal without dignifying it with excessive attention. He presented clear evidence of Marcus Thompson's betrayal and the foreign intelligence operation that had exploited the former gardener's access and resentments. Financial records, communications intercepts, and analytical reports painted a picture of sophisticated psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. The conversation portrayed in this drama never took place, he stated with quiet firmness. The emotions attributed to me bear no resemblance to my actual feelings or statements. The portrayal of family relationships is not merely incorrect, but deliberately crafted to undermine public confidence in the institution of monarchy itself. The international reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes of the broadcast conclusion, world leaders began issuing statements of support. President Biden condemned foreign interference in allied democratic institutions, while European Union leadership announced enhanced investigations into information warfare campaigns targeting member states. The evidence presented during the speech triggered immediate action from law enforcement agencies. Marcus Thompson was arrested within hours on charges of breach of confidence and violation of official secrets. The broader network of information sources was systematically dismantled through coordinated arrests and civil litigation. Netflix faced unprecedented legal and diplomatic pressure to remove the controversial content and prevent similar incidents in the future. Public opinion shifted dramatically in the wake of the king's address. The revelation that the royal family had been targeted by foreign intelligence operations generated sympathy and support that transcended traditional political divisions. Even Republican critics acknowledged that the attack on constitutional institutions represented a broader threat to democratic governance that required unified response. Social media platforms, previously overwhelmed by the controversy, began implementing enhanced measures to identify and remove coordinated, inauthentic behavior related to the royal family. The viral spread of misinformation was gradually contained as the truth of the foreign interference campaign became widely understood and accepted. The Commonwealth response proved particularly significant for the monarchy's long-term survival. Countries that had been considering Republican transitions paused their plans as they recognized the broader implications of allowing foreign actors to manipulate their constitutional arrangements. The attack on the British Crown was understood as an attack on the entire Commonwealth system of government. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, despite his own Republican sympathies, condemned the foreign interference and postponed the planned referendum on monarchical government. "We will not allow foreign state actors to manipulate our constitutional decisions," he declared. "Any changes to our system of government must be made by Australians based on Australian interests, not foreign propaganda disguised as entertainment." Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau went further, announcing enhanced cybersecurity measures to protect Canadian democratic institutions from similar cultural warfare campaigns. The revelation that entertainment media could be weaponized for foreign interference had profound implications for information security across all democratic societies. The legal consequences continued to mount for those involved in the conspiracy. Thompson's cooperation with authorities revealed the full scope of the intelligence operation, leading to additional arrests and international arrest warrants for foreign operatives who had coordinated the campaign. Netflix faced massive lawsuits not only from the royal family, but from shareholders who argued that the company had become an unwitting vehicle for foreign interference. The entertainment industry responded with unprecedented soul-searching about the ethics of dramatizing living public figures and the vulnerability of production companies to manipulation by foreign intelligence services. Industry organizations developed new guidelines for verifying source information and protecting against coordinated deception campaigns. King Charles's approval ratings soared to their highest levels since his coronation as the British public rallied around their monarch in the face of foreign attack. The controversy that had threatened to destroy his reign instead became the defining moment that established his credibility and strength as a leader capable of defending British institutions against sophisticated modern threats. The long-term implications extended far beyond the immediate crisis. The palace implemented comprehensive security reforms to protect against future information warfare campaigns, including enhanced background checking, improved confidentiality protocols, and sophisticated monitoring systems to detect potential breaches before they could be exploited. Royal communications evolved dramatically in response to the digital age challenges revealed by the crisis. The monarchy embraced new technologies and platforms while maintaining its essential character and dignity. The successful defense against coordinated misinformation established precedents for how democratic institutions could protect themselves in an era of weaponized entertainment media. The international community recognized the broader lessons of the Netflix controversy. NATO and allied intelligence services developed new frameworks for identifying and countering cultural warfare campaigns. The European Union enhanced its disinformation monitoring capabilities specifically to address threats transmitted through entertainment media rather than traditional propaganda channels. 6 months after the controversial episode first aired, King Charles reflected on the crisis during a private moment in the same study where he had first learned of the attack on his character. The crown that had felt so heavy during those dark days now rested more comfortably on his head, strengthened rather than weakened by the trial it had endured. The monarchy had survived its greatest modern challenge by adapting to new realities while preserving its essential character. The institution that had seemed vulnerable to the power of fictional narrative had proven its resilience by defending truth against sophisticated deception. The battle for the crown had been won not through tradition alone, but through the courage to confront new forms of warfare with new methods of resistance. Prince William and Princess Anne joined their father for a family dinner that evening, the first truly relaxed gathering they had shared since the crisis began. The fictional portrayal of their relationships had been decisively refuted, but, more importantly, their actual bonds had been strengthened by facing the challenge together. The crown survived because we chose to fight for it, Princess Anne observed as they raised glasses in a quiet toast to their victory. But, more than that, we fought for the truth itself. That's what makes an institution worth preserving. King Charles nodded, understanding that the crisis had taught him essential lessons about leadership in the modern world. The monarchy's future security would depend not on avoiding controversy, but on maintaining the moral authority to distinguish truth from fiction when the stakes demanded it. The Netflix controversy had ended not with the destruction of the crown, but with its renewal, strengthened by trial and tempered by the successful defense of truth against sophisticated deception. The institution that had weathered centuries of challenges had proven once again that adaptation and resilience, rather than mere tradition, were the keys to survival in an ever-changing world. The final irony was perhaps the most satisfying. A fictional attack on the monarchy's legitimacy had instead provided the real King Charles with his greatest triumph, establishing him as a defender of democratic institutions against the emerging threats of the 21st century. The crown that had seemed so vulnerable had proven to be stronger than anyone had dared to hope.